Welcome to Griffonomics. Today, we are undertaking a custom deep dive tailored specifically for you.
Yeah, we're looking at a highly granular investigative report on a genuinely fascinating medtech company called NeuroOne Medical Technologies Corporation,
Right.
or NMTC.
Right, NMTC. And to give you the full picture, we pulled together a really massive stack of source materials for this.
It is quite the stack, honestly.
Yeah, we are parsing through the recent Q1 2026 financial earnings calls, the latest 10Q report, plus some incredibly revealing executive interviews with their CEO, Dave Rosa.
Along with their investor presentations and clinical trial transcripts. And when you lay it all out, it paints a picture of a company at a highly critical juncture.
Which brings us directly to the mission of today's deep dive. We are going to unpack NMTC's massive strategic pivot. They're transforming from a pure diagnostic sensor developer into a multi-platform therapeutic powerhouse.
But, and this is the key tension we have to weigh their game-changing technology against the ticking clock of a severe liquidity wall.
Exactly. Whether you are evaluating early-stage medtech for your own portfolio or you are just fascinated by the future of brain surgery, this story is a masterclass in tension. It's all about balancing groundbreaking innovation against extreme financial reality.
You really have two completely different stories playing out simultaneously here. On the clinical side, you have engineering that is fundamentally rewriting the rules of neurosurgery.
Right.
But on the operational side, that brilliant engineering is colliding head-on with the cold, hard math of a corporate balance sheet.
Okay, let's unpack this because the clinical side of the story is wild. And MTC manufactures high-definition, paper-thin, flexible film electrodes.
Right. And to understand why this matters to you, you really have to picture the legacy surgical approach for something like severe epilepsy.
Historically, if a patient had epilepsy that couldn't be managed with drugs, doctors had to find the exact origin point of those seizures,
And to do that, they literally had to remove the top portion of the patient's skull.
just to place these bulky legacy electrodes directly onto the brain. Then they reattach the skull and wait in the hospital for a seizure to happen.
Which is an incredibly brutal procedure. You're introducing massive trauma just to get a diagnostic reading.
And the human cost of that trauma is a huge barrier to adoption. The CEO shared a really poignant anecdote in one of the sources about seeing photos of teenage epilepsy patients who had this legacy procedure.
Because of how the skull heals after being sawed open, these kids were left with highly noticeable physical deformities.
Literal ridges and scars on their heads right before major life events like going to the prom. The psychological impact is devastating. So many parents just refuse to let their children undergo the surgery.
Meaning a huge portion of the addressable market is opting out of treatment entirely.
Right. But that psychological and physical barrier is exactly the problem NMTC's minimally invasive method solves.
By shifting away from rigid, bulky sensors to these flexible, thin film electrodes, they change the entire surgical paradigm.
Instead of removing the top of the skull, their EVO electrodes are so flexible they can be rolled up into a tiny tube. A surgeon simply threads that tube through a millimeter-sized hole in the skull.
It unfurls once inside.
Yeah.
The patient can literally go home the next day.
Walking down the street, and no one would ever know they just had brain surgery.
What's fascinating here is how this transitions into the concept of Theranostics. This is where NMTC essentially disrupted the traditional two-surgery model.
Because in the past, even with less invasive sensors, patients still faced two distinct procedures.
Exactly. First, you undergo surgery to implant diagnostic sensors. Once they map the brain and find the problematic tissue, they remove the sensors, send you home, and then schedule a completely separate second surgery to go back in and cut out that bad tissue.
Two brain surgeries. Think about the physical toll that takes, let alone the sheer anxiety.
But NMTC gained FDA clearance for their on-RF system, which fundamentally changes that pathway. They are currently the only company with FDA clearance to use the exact same implanted electrode for both diagnostic mapping and therapeutic ablation.
Ablation, meaning they use targeted radiofrequency heat to destroy the seizure-causing tissue.
Right. They locate the problem with the electrode, and then they immediately push a button and use that exact same device to treat the problem. Diagnosis and therapy wrapped into one. Theranostics.
It is an elegant clinical solution. But if you are looking at the business model, you also have to look at the financial ripple effect of this, specifically what the sources call the bedside shift.
The operational implications for hospital administrators are massive here. Because that diagnostic electrode is already sitting right there in the patient's brain, doctors do not need to move the patient back into a sterile, highly complex operating room for the second procedure.
And operating rooms are the most expensive real estate in any hospital. Tying one up costs an absolute fortune.
Exactly. With the on-RF system, the ablation can literally be done right at the patient's bedside in a standard recovery room. It saves hospitals enormous facility costs, frees up surgical bottlenecks, and obviously completely transforms the patient's experience.
It's a rare triple win. A win for the patient, the surgeon, and the hospital's bottom line. But NMTC is not stopping at the brain. They are aggressively expanding this thin film platform into the multi-billion-dollar pain management market.
Right, starting with facial pain.
Yeah, they recently initiated a limited market release of their 1RF trigeminal nerve ablation system for severe facial pain. And the incredible stat here is that 9 out of 9 patients treated reported being completely pain-free.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, you start to see the sheer scale of the total addressable market. That facial pain application is remarkable, but the lower back pain market is a $3 billion industry,
Huge. And the legacy treatment there involves bulky spinal cord stimulators.
which have major flaws. They require a surgical incision to implant, and crucially, because they are cylindrical wires, they stimulate in a wasteful 360-degree radius.
Meaning they send electrical energy in all directions instead of just downward into the spinal cord?
Right. So NMTC engineered a percutaneous paddle. Percutaneous, just meaning it can be delivered through the skin without a major surgical incision.
Using that same flexible thin film tech, it can be rolled up and delivered right to the spine through a standard 14-gauge needle.
Once it exits the needle, it unrolls and sits perfectly flat on the spinal cord. Because it's flat, 100% of the electrical energy is directed downward.
Exactly where it is needed. And the knock-on effect of that efficiency is huge. It saves roughly 30% to 40% in battery life.
Which is everything for a patient. When a traditional stimulator battery dies, you need another surgery just to replace it. Saving 40% battery means years longer without another invasive procedure. They are initiating long-term animal studies for this paddle in Q2 of 2026.
That back pain market is massive, but the drug delivery catalyst really feels revolutionary. They are adapting their hollow CG electrodes to deliver gene and cell therapies directly into brain tissue.
For targeting incredibly aggressive conditions like glioblastomas and complex epilepsy.
Right, and pharma companies absolutely love this.
Because doctors can record a patient's baseline brain activity, deliver the drug through the exact same device, and then continuously monitor brain waves for up to 30 days.
Without introducing new surgical variables that muddy the clinical data.
Exactly. They're looking for pre-seizure activity, those subtle electrical spikes that indicate a seizure is building. By having the monitor and delivery tool be the same device, pharma can measure the drug's immediate efficacy in real time.
And management has actually accelerated this program by 6 months, aiming for commercial and investigational readiness by Q3 of 2026.
It is a massive timeline shift.
So what does this all mean? We have this disruptive Theranostic technology, but we need to pivot to the hard financial data from Q1 2026.
Because there's a massive financial shadow hanging over the company right now.
Let's look at the numbers. They reported a revenue beat, $2.9 million in product revenue, up 5.5% sequentially, with projections of at least $10.5 million for the full fiscal year 2026.
The sequential growth is positive, but the margin forensics tell a much more nuanced story. Product gross margin hit 54.2%.
Which sounds healthy, but it is actually down year over year from 58.9%.
Right. And this drop is due to discount pricing for their distributor, slight material inflation, and lower sales volume failing to absorb fixed overhead.
Which brings us to the Zimmer Biomet golden handcuffs. Zimmer has the exclusive distribution license for the brain ablation products.
Meaning Zimmer absorbs all the massive sales and marketing costs. NMTC doesn't need an expensive sales force.
But the concentration risk is extreme. Zimmer effectively accounts for 100% of NMTC's product revenue,
making their financial health entirely dependent on a single partner's ordering behavior. We saw this year-over-year revenue drop simply because Zimmer placed a massive initial stocking order back in Q1 2025.
Though in December 2025, they did sign an amendment establishing strict minimum purchase requirements to get some future order visibility.
It is a band-aid, but it doesn't solve the structural issue. Which leads us to the going concern cliff, the binary risk of this story.
Right. Despite the groundbreaking tech, NMTC ended December 2025 with just $3.6 million in cash.
Burning through nearly half of their $6.6 million stockpile in just 90 days.
It creates a severe liquidity wall. Operations are only funded through September 2026.
Adding to the pressure, they were granted an extension until May 4, 2026 to regain Nasdaq $1 minimum bid compliance.
September 2026 is terrifyingly close, but this is exactly why CEO Dave Rosa is running a strict capital-light strategy.
Rather than spending millions to build pulse generators or a massive commercial infrastructure, NMTC is actively seeking strategic partnerships.
Piggybacking on established giants like Medtronic, Boston Scientific, or Abbott, who already have FDA-cleared hardware and vast distribution networks.
And if you look at the M&A forensics, there are massive structural clues pointing toward an acquisition or a major licensing buyout.
They recently added Jason Mills to their board of directors.
Yes, and explicitly highlighted his role as strategy EVP at Penumbra during their $14.5 billion acquisition by Boston Scientific.
Plus, executive contracts include strict change in control severance and stock acceleration provisions.
Strongly signaling the company is positioning itself for a potential sale.
So here is the final verdict for you. It is a speculative scenario where brilliant, moat-protected Theranostic engineering is in a dead sprint against a September 2026 bank account zero.
This raises an important question. What happens when NMTC's Theranostic capabilities collide with predictive AI?
Oh, that's a fascinating thought.
If these thin film electrodes are already capable of continuously monitoring brainwaves for 30 days and detecting invisible pre-seizure activity, how long until an integrated AI chip learns a patient's unique neural signature?
Meaning it could predict an event before it happens.
Exactly. It could automatically trigger a microdose of drug delivery or a tiny stimulation burst to stop a neurological event before it even happens, creating a fully autonomous, closed-loop brain therapy system.
That is the definition of science fiction becoming medical reality. Thank you for joining this deep dive. Risk defined, portfolio protected.